What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another video from Pink Tourmaline. And right out the gate, I want to start with a shout out to Elegant Sonatas. Elegant Sonatas, you gave me the idea to research this current video, which is going to center around Jason Jorjani. So Jason Jorjani is an individual that I actually know of. I didn't realize this, but I actually do know this guy because I've seen him on the Danny Jones podcast. I think he was talking about ancient history. He's the history of ancient Egypt and what really was going on with the pyramids and different things like that. Really, really fascinating guy. When I listened to him, he always came across very sincere, very authentic, and extremely knowledgeable and well researched. So when I realized who it was, I got excited. Now I started looking up some videos that also intersected with a lot of the things that I'm focusing on right now, which is truly trying to get my head around this whole idea of Earth being some sort of a Loosh farm and wondering what is the merit to this theory, because it's really blown me away. The other thing that I'm just so fascinated by is how I had this massive obsession with extraterrestrials and all of the information out there. That seems to be now coming to light slowly but surely. I think the majority of the public used to just laugh when you bring this type of stuff up. Now it seems that most people have accepted that there's a lot of stuff being withheld and that there has been alien contact. Just to the extent of the information is still unknown. I think it's quite deep, but anyways, it's just so fascinating to me that we now have, I had that obsession. I was so fascinated by it. And I thought now I'm in a brand new area, which is obviously not completely unrelated to extraterrestrials, because we all have spiritual energy and we all exist probably beyond these physical bodies. But I thought it was a separate area of research. Like when you watch the NDEs, you're like, okay, this is the next level. This is really what's important, as opposed to all the happenings in the universe. Like, I really want to know what goes beyond the universe. But now it seems like there's this massive intersection of ETs and their various agendas and what is happening to us, at least on this planet and in the astral plane, or whatever you want to call it, beyond our physical bodies. It's really blowing me away. So I feel like all that time I spent learning about that material 10 years ago, more than 10 years ago, 12 years ago, starting from that point, I feel like is all very helpful to me right now, because I don't have to break down this barrier of like, yeah, well, ETs are crazy, man. There's no evidence. Like I already passed that threshold a long, long time ago. So it's just making all of this a richer process, I would say. Okay, so without further ado, let me give you guys a heads up who Jason Jorjani is if you're unfamiliar with him, just to give you a little bit of background. But yeah, I think you're going to see when you listen to him speak, you'll be very impressed. And look, in a lot of these cases, when I'm hearing a lot of these experts, I will be using my intuition. I will be using my judgment to determine if what's being said, even though it might sound wildly fanciful and out of this world, literally, I will be using my character assessment of people as they're speaking, just my years of experience on this planet. Because I don't know at this point, I'm still so early in my research. I don't really know what else to do. Like, I'm trying to go through these resources the best I can and use logic every step of the way, but there's still so much I have to do to uncover before I could even claim any sort of semblance of an expertise in this area. But I do believe in my ability, and maybe perhaps all of our abilities deep down somewhere, right, in terms of being able to assess truthfulness, being able to assess honesty. But I'm going to trust in that. I'm going to trust in my intuition. And I think ultimately we probably all have this ability to varying degrees. I'm not trying to say, by the way, I'm not trying to say that I have a preternatural ability to determine this. I just don't know what else to do. But I do feel like I have a fairly decent ability. I'm going to trust myself. I'm going to trust in that intuition, and we're going to go from there. And when I do look into my own intuition, I feel like this guy's on the right path. This guy's trying to relay positive, good information. He's trying to do his due diligence. So I just want to say that out the gate. All right, let's talk about Jason Jorjani. Who is he? He's an American philosopher and writer born in New York City in 1981, 1 year younger than me. He studied at New York University, where he earned his BA and MA, later completed a PhD in philosophy at Stony Brook University in 2013. He's taught courses in science, technology, society, the philosophy of Martin Heidegger. I don't know who that is. Comparative religions, ethics. I mean, so cool. He's done so many things: technology, science, religion, philosophy. political theory, and Iranian history, including as a faculty member at the New Jersey Institute of Technology. I'd be curious to know what he thinks of the political state right now. He is the author of numerous books, including Prometheus and Atlas, which won the 2016 Book Award and Parapsychological Association. And his work often focuses on philosophy, technology, mythology, Iran, and the paranormal. He's also a controversial public figure because of his past involvement with Arctos Media and Alt-Right Corporation, associations that drew major criticism and public scrutiny. And now I looked up Arctos Media. I didn't look up Alt-Right Corporation, but Arctos Media is just a think tank devoted to anti-globalism. I don't see how that's so controversial. I don't know what their protocols were, exactly the type of content they were producing or releasing, but on its face, it didn't sound super controversial unless you're, I guess, a globalist of some sort, or you're trying to push that agenda, which conflicted with what they were trying to achieve. So anyways, that's Jason Jorjani in a quick nutshell, just to give you guys a little bit of background. Now, without further ado, let's go through a bunch. I found this amazing interview of Jason Jorjani that talks about a lot of the topics that I've been focusing on the channel lately. But I want to start with this first. Okay, just a little snippet, a little clip here. And I think this is so important for all of us to bear in mind. Now, most of you guys who have already been watching the content and commenting, you're probably already in the same zone as me. You are fascinated by this idea of what happens to our consciousness. Does it disappear and disintegrate, which I don't believe. Does it exist? How does it exist? Where does it go beyond death? It is a all-consuming question in a lot of ways. And I'm honestly surprised that not a lot more people think about this very seriously. But my point is if you're watching this channel, you probably are in that category. You're in that category where you are contemplating this. You're thinking about this. This is why you've gotten to this point. This is why you stumbled across this video. But anyways, I do find it shocking that a lot of people don't think about this harder and longer. I think maybe some people, one explanation is some people just give up and say, well, there's no answers anywhere in mainstream media or anywhere in schools or things like that. So it must be an unanswerable question. I have to believe that has to exist for a lot of people on some level as a blockade. And then I think other people, you just get so caught up in the daily grind of survival and things like that. You just put it to the side and focus on how to live day to day, step by step. So I guess I can understand how it can happen. And it's actually has happened to me at points in my life where I haven't made this an ultimate priority, but it's always been something in the back of my mind. And I love what he says in this video. And again, it's not attacking people who aren't contemplating this question, but I think it brings to light the idea that if you do love to think and ruminate and contemplate in positive ways, this should be a question that you are focused on in terms, like at the top of the bill of the utmost importance. So anyways, I'll let Jason Jorjani say it in his own words.
You know, any serious philosopher, I think, has to ultimately address the question of death and the possible survival of bodily death. I don't think you can be a serious thinker without doing that. And we've seen throughout the history of philosophy, even I was going to say from Plato onward, but Pythagoras, Heraclitus, all discuss this subject, even, in the Genesis stage of the history of Western philosophy. And then it becomes a major preoccupation of Plato.
Okay. So anyway, it's just a short little nugget. He's talking about full-time philosophers, people that literally contemplate and think for a living. But I think it's something that we should take as regular people, as regular folks, that this is an important thing to at least think about. And if you do feel that you're not going to think about it because the answers just simply aren't out there, I think you should take a deeper look. I think there's a lot of interesting answers. And I'm not saying I am like 100% certain in the direction that I'm going, far from it, as I've changed my vantage point on this topic so many times throughout my life, but I'm willing to learn and I want to learn. And it is utterly and endlessly fascinating. Moreover, the direction that we're going in right now in terms of the stuff that I'm uncovering, if there is indeed solid merit to all this stuff, it is not only fascinating, but I believe it is important because it's tied directly to our liberation. All right. Now let's get into the next clip. This is the big one. This is the long one that I've included, and he comes back to this idea of Loosh. He talks about it directly. Again, when I listened to the Danny Jones interview, I don't believe he ever mentioned the concept of Loosh. It was a different topic entirely, but he brings this up. He talks about it, and he basically shares that same perspective that has been given by David Icke, by a lot of these other folks, by a lot of the remote viewing accounts. And I'd be curious to know, as I dig deeper into him and into his research, where are his sources from? Are they from these same sources that we've already watched? Some of these remote viewers, are they coming from ancient texts? Like, I'd really love to get into the weeds in terms of where he's sourcing all this information, so I could go through and look at these sources and cross compare them as well. Like, that would be such a fascinating thing. If I ever had the chance to talk to Jorjani, I'd love to know all these little specifics of how he gathered and cross-referenced and came up with a lot of his ideas that he's presenting here. But anyways, without further ado, mind-blowing stuff. Check this out about the fact that we are Loosh.
Okay, we have Reincarnation. Again, your book brings so much data to it. We're not living in a Michael Jackson, We Are the World music video. And the stage is set. In essence, and hope you don't mind if I give away the Gnostic plot, but we are divine sparks being fed by archons. We are food for the moon, as Gurdjieff said, and you mentioned in your book. We are Loosh, and we are trapped in, in a sort of ranch, right? I mean, to put it very blunt and basic.
The first person to make this observation in modern paranormal research was actually Charles Fort.
He was, you're right.
In the 1920s said, we're being farmed. We're property, and this is a farm. And, when you read through Robert Monroe's writings, especially his book, Far Journeys, and you see how he develops this conception of human energy that can be harvested, which he calls loosh, and the production of this loosh, particularly through adverse and intense emotional states, extreme desire, anguish, deep emotional suffering, trauma. So all these intense emotional states produce this energy that can be harvested, which he calls loosh. So, when you combine Fort's insight with that, you might as well conclude that we're living on a loosh farm.
So let's talk about the two of these. He's talking about Bob Monroe, who I do know a fair amount about at this point, not an expert by any means, but I have been researching him. And this other gentleman, I believe he said his name was Ford, the guy from the 1920s. So I know that Bob Monroe came about a lot of his theories via his, whether they were out-of-body experiences or remote viewing experiences. That's how he gathered the intel and the data with his teams and people. But I'd love to know how this other gentleman, because I didn't know that until I watched this video, how this other gentleman back in the 1920s, way before Bob Monroe had developed these theories. So I'm really curious to know if anybody has an answer to that. Please post it in the comments. But I'm really curious to know how that gentleman way back in the 1920s was coming up with this exact same theory. Where did he get that information from? Would love to know.
As I put it in Thenosis. And this is an insight that, others have had as well. I mean, Gurdjieff called it something like askonin, some weird word he coined for this energy that's harvested, he believed, by the moon. And that if you don't develop an extremely acute self-consciousness and very self-aware intentionality in life, and you go about life living like a robot, as he put it, you're going to be basically energy harvested by the moon. And not be able to preserve your individuality.
We talk about the basis of this channel. I've talked about the basis of this channel being the purpose of life. And when I began thinking more along the lines of the New Age spiritualism movement, just listening to these beautiful positive NDEs, my general theory was just to live, love, learn, and just to be here and learn. And life was a school, etc. Now, as my thought process is evolving with a lot of this new information, it's not as though there's an explicit purpose for each of us, as is often described in New Age spiritualism, but it's like we have a collective purpose, and that collective purpose is, as he mentioned, live with intentionality. Don't just be a robot. Don't just go with the flow and kind of live your life, work, follow the normal protocols, and not without really thinking or contemplating about the bigger picture. and move on, because if you go that way, you're just staying in, you're an idol. You're just staying in this recycling bin, the wheel of samsara. And so it would seem that while it's not a, hey, we're setting this purpose up for you so you can achieve these goals, it's not that, but instead it's, hey, we're being constrained. And so the general collective objective perhaps might be for all of us to wake up, again, not to reach some external objective. It's just to be free. It's just to get back to our true selves and our true nature. This could be what we should be ultimately, mainly, primarily focused on, just for our own sake, just for our own ability to have a liberated existence. And perhaps understanding all of this, if I'm to understand this, what he's saying correctly, but by understanding all of this, we can maybe, once this next life or whatever is complete, we can maybe escape this reincarnation trap, escape this recycling system, and traverse on and elevate up and go back to where we're meant to be, I suppose, outside of this farm.
So Gurdjieff also had an insight into this. And I put basically Robert Monroe's research and Gurdjieff's, I suppose you could say, theosophical insights, together with also Dr. Carla Turner's abduction research, where many people who are experiencers of the close encounter phenomenon have also reported that the supposed aliens who abduct people are actually harvesting and processing souls. Mm-hmm. And in particular, Carla Turner's patients or subjects, the people who reported close encounters to her, described the inside of some metallic sphere where, soul harvesting and the manipulation of people between death and rebirth was taking place. And I think there's good reason to believe, when we look at, other lines of evidence in the close encounter research, that this place that she's describing is the moon, and that Gurdjieff was on to something when he said that, if we're not careful, we're going to wind up being food for the moon. So I suspect that, in my book, Closer Encounters, my tome on UFOs, mm-hmm. I made an extensive argument for why the moon is an artificial satellite. But where I go in Thenosis is to further that argument into a case for the fact that that artificial satellite is filled with psychotronic machinery of some kind, which is involved in the attempted harvesting of energy from souls after death and the processing of people through an afterlife system that basically denies them their own agency in choosing the conditions of their rebirth, and funnels them through this afterlife in a way that predetermines the conditions they're going to be reborn under, including this, afterlife, life review, the life review that sure. These entities, subject people to, in order to then manipulate them or guide them through the guilt and whatever shame that they are subjected to in the course of this afterlife review.
It's so wild. Because again, when I first discovered these life reviews, I was like, oh my God, it all makes sense that everything we're kind of doing, positive and negative, we get to review, and that builds to the learning curve, and that adds to where we might go afterwards to like keep learning, look at the mistakes we made and keep building from it. And for a while, and maybe I'll go back to this mindset again, I don't know, but for a while that gave me a lot of peace that seemed to fit together. And then of course it's now been, that idea has been, for the time being, dismantled to some extent because of a lot of people pointing out the observation of why would you need your memory wiped if you're meant to be progressively learning and experiencing what that doesn't make sense. And it's kind of like, yeah, I see what you're saying. The more logical conclusion is that the memory wipe is happening to kind of keep you perpetually stuck. Like that makes more sense to me. Now there could be a medium ground, or there could be a reason, there could be explanation. I'm saying there's no possible way with the memory wipe system and whatnot that we couldn't be learning and progressing. I guess it is still possible, but just simply using my logic and using what people have told me thus far and just thinking it through, I'm kind of now starting to feel that, man, those whole things are just big manipulations. But it's still a little jarring to me to think about that, when for a long time, when I first discovered that stuff, I'm like, oh, it all makes sense. And we got to watch, we need to be mindful of every decision we make, of the ripple effect that it will have. And also for our own growth benefit, to make sure that we're growing as strongly and effectively and efficiently as possible. We need to, everything we do matters. I still think everything we do matters, but for different reasons, not because we want to pass this like life review thing, but perhaps just to keep our vibration as high as possible, so we have a chance to successfully navigate out of the system. The other thing that he mentioned, which is mind-blowing, which I haven't heard a ton of, I think I heard David Icke talk about this again years ago, but this is before I really bought into a lot of the stuff that David Icke has spoken about. I'm pretty sure I heard David Icke way back in the day talking about the moon being some artificial structure and having this other use. It's just a lot. It's a lot for me to process right now. It's mind-blowing. It's wild. And I think when I first heard of it, it was more difficult for me to accept. Now I would say I would need to do a lot more research and get my head around this idea more, but it's definitely easier for me to accept, once again, in light of so many things that David Icke said back in the day that have proved to be true, which is still mind-blowing to me. So I have to pay a lot of attention to the things that David Icke said, because he has proved over the last few decades that, man, he does know what he's talking about, especially with a lot of the crazy, dark, evil stuff that is happening on this planet. All right, moving on. He mentions this idea of the ETs, or some of these extraterrestrial entities, managing the souls coming out and dealing with this energy extraction or energy harvesting from the souls, of the Isbis as they're described elsewhere. And in this clip, he actually talks about the overlap between these abduction accounts and soul management, that they're being managed by the same group of entities. Again, so wild how these two worlds that are seemingly disparate seem to merge and seem to blend. And you could, like, it's even more wild when, because I'm not even looking at this through a religious lens, but imagine you are or you came from a really highly religious background, and to now see that there might be some interplay between your religious philosophies and a lot of these ET accounts. Like, I don't know, it's pretty wild, but it's still wild for me, even not that I ever, or at least not for a long time, have ever felt strongly connected to a particular organized religion. But it's still wild that the NDE, the pursuit of like learning about NDEs and consciousness and life beyond this body, seems to tie in and be interconnected very closely with all of this ET stuff. So anyways, I'm going to let Jason Jorjani talk about this overlap here.
So this is consistent across the literature, both of the afterlife and of close encounter cases. And those two literatures interpenetrate and overlap in a way that makes it legitimate to conclude that we're dealing with the same entities in the same realm in both alien abductions, so-called alien abductions, and management of souls in the afterlife. So, for example, there are cases where a person will be in the middle of an abduction, and they will see, their uncle that they were particularly close to and fond of. And their uncle is with the Greys. And their uncle gives them some message to bring back to, let's say, their father. Say it's the father's brother, right? Tell your dad I'm all right. Everything's fine here. And, the abductee is wondering what the hell his uncle is doing there, because he presumes his uncle is still alive. Well, he's returned by the aliens. And the next day, they get a phone call at the family's house that the uncle passed away the previous afternoon before the abduction took place. So deceased people are seen in transit together with the Greys by people who are being abducted by the Greys.
This is wild, dude. It's wild. And what is I still don't even know. Maybe this guy has talked about it, Jason Jorjani, in some of his books or some of his talks. I don't know what the purpose is, or really ever has been, of these alien abductions. I've heard that Dr. Stephen Greer has said that a lot of these abductions were actually covert military operations with entities that are posing as extraterrestrials, but they're actually being done by us. I think the way that he's talking about it, Jason Jorjani, he's not saying that. He's saying that these are actually, well, he's putting in quotes, aliens. So maybe they are some sort of simulated ET, but it sounds like they're in cahoots or in line with the entities or the broader organization that is also managing our energies or consciousness or whatever, and just keeping us in this recycling loop of reincarnation. It's just a lot. It's just a lot to process, a lot to think about. But like I said, just so fascinating that it all ties together. Now, I remember I made the video about Brett Stewart with the remote viewing guy, and that super, super cool thing about he goes into all this detail working with the team of 3 other remote viewers, and they gathered all this intel about this entire race or group of entities that is managing the entire system and systems across the galaxy. He cites Brett Stewart, which is really cool because I love to see the overlaps. That makes me feel happy as I'm going along on this trail. You know, when I was first reading a lot, this is way back when I was starting my business, when I was first reading a lot of self-development and self-help books. I'd never read them in my entire life. And then people said, you got to read this stuff. There's amazing nuggets for productivity, for how to build a business, for how to do this, that, and the other. And so I said, okay, I'll give it a shot. I read one book, read another book, read another book, read another book. And then I remember figuring out that the true nuggets of wisdom, the really good stuff that you have to hold on to, is the stuff that you're finding across these different resources. Oh my God, that book also said this. Oh my God, this book also said that. And then when you find the overlaps, it's like you can start to extract the really solid nuggets of wisdom and put that at the top of your list in terms of protocols to follow for success. And I feel like something similar is happening with this journey as well. When I see these guys cross-reference each other, that makes me happy because now I'm feeling like, okay, multiple people are accepting and buying into a lot of these narratives or the ways in which this information was extracted. So it makes me think, okay, I'm starting to hit on the right path. But anyways, without further ado, let's listen to Jason Jorjani talk very positively about Brett Stewart and his findings with his team of remote viewers.
And Brett Stewart, his entire team, of course, you know, as is the case typically with remote viewing, they were blind to the target and they were independently tasked. But their remote viewing data basically lined up, and they all corroborated each other in arriving at the following horrifying picture. They said that millions of years ago, there was a war in this solar system, and that a group of very powerful people who had a colonialist, expansionist, imperialist mindset wanted to use human souls for energy extraction and to basically breed people in order to harvest their psychic energy. And another faction of either another faction of this group or another significantly powerful group of people within our solar system revolted against this. They rebelled against these sort of psychical imperialists or whatever, you know, Loosh farmers, right? And the rebels lost the war. And Brett Stewart and his team said basically this war devastated the entire solar system. And I think there's reason to believe that the evidence that Dr. John Brandenburg found for, you know, nuclear bombardment of Mars and, you know, the basically nuclear destruction of the Martian biosphere, which dates back millions of years, is probably a consequence of this war that Brett Stewart and his team are describing. In other words, these people murdered Mars. And what they said is that the rebels lost. The rebels were trying to defend human autonomy and human dignity and self-determination. They seem to basically have had what I would call a Promethean attitude toward the destiny of the human race, and, you know, basically wanted to see humanity pursue an independent course of development and flourish as a species with dignity and independence. And they lost this war, the rebels did. And the team said these rebels are still around, but they're sort of dug in a sort of unfavorable position. And they're kind of waiting for another opportunity to challenge this control system. So, you know, take that for what it's worth. I detail that at the heart of Thenosis.
This discussion of the war, this was actually discussed in a previous video that I made. Another gentleman with a whole team of remote viewers. I think they claimed, or he claimed, that his team is like the best assortment of remote viewers on the planet. They actually also found this exact same testimony, or found this exact same story, that there was some war, some battle over Earth, and then these forces won, that are now controlling and managing Earth and managing this entire system and this entire installation. But anyways, yeah. So, but I think the difference was with his account is he said not that they were defeated or outnumbered or anything, but he said they were big on the notion of free will. So they were waiting they would only intervene if, based on free will, we chose to be liberated, versus I think the way that Jorjani is describing it is more they were beaten back into submission, and they're kind of waiting there, and they want to help us, but they're waiting for the right opportunity. And maybe they're both saying the same thing in different ways, or maybe they are differing accounts. I'm not exactly sure, but just wanted to point that out. All right, there is our amazing handful of clips from this incredible interview from Jason Jorjani. This is definitely somebody that I want to hear more from, and definitely somebody that sounds very credible, very knowledgeable. Looking forward to at some point getting my hands on his books. I'm so behind on books right now, so I can't do that just yet. But definitely want to listen to more interviews and see if there's more things that corroborate this narrative and this idea of Earth being a Loosh farm, stuck in a soul trap, stuck in a reincarnation loop over and over, to feed the engine, to feed this race, to feed this machine of, it seems, conquest. So we'll see what else I can find. But this is what I got for you guys today. Mind-blowing stuff, fascinating stuff. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Guys, give me more recommendations. Give me more resources. Give me more people to listen to and to look at. Give me credible people. Give me all that good stuff, because I want to keep learning and I want to keep sharing as I go along and as I learn. This is one heck of a ride, and I really appreciate all of you for helping me along on this journey. Thank you guys so much for joining, and I'll see you in the next video. Take it easy.